Welcome back. We're getting right to some talking points in our next panel. We discussed the recording that has Michael Bloomberg's campaign in trouble. But first, let's talk about Congressman Rose's comments on the travel restrictions for New Yorkers. Here to break it all down are CBSN New York's urban affairs expert, Mark Peters, and Heath Brown, an associate professor of public policy at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here today.
Great to be here.
So were you surprised when the congressman said, a Democratic congressman, said that he did not support the green light law?
The Democratic Party in New York seems to have been fairly well united on this point, and so I was surprised to hear a prominent Democrat suggest that he was opposed to something that, as I said, I think has become part of Democratic orthodoxy in this city.
Keith.
Yeah, it's so strange these days to hear a Democrat really talking like a Republican in so many ways. It's just unheard of these days in Washington.
That's because he represents a conservative district?
That's what's so strange, and I think we've become so used to members of Congress representing quite unified districts in many ways, and you don't get them talking in these ways that Max Rose did. So it was very surprising to me.
But while he eschewed politics and said he wasn't a politician and he was trying to do the right thing, I can't help but wonder if the green light law was a very political decision because he's got a hot hot general election contest from Nicole Maliotakis, and he's worried about it.
Sure, I think it clearly is a political. I mean, we don't know what's in his head and what he truly believes, but obviously politics has to influence that. He's in a district that probably has some concerns about the green light law.
I want to switch topics right now. I want to talk about Michael Bloomberg and a tape that surfaced this week that could cause him some trouble. Let's take a listen.
95% of your murderers and murder victims fit into one MO. You can just take the description, Xerox it, and pass it out to all the cops. They are male, minorities, 15 to 25. That's true in New York, it's true in virtually every city. And that's where the real crime is.
The question is this: how devastating or not is the fact that this tape has surfaced some 2 weeks before Super Tuesday?
Yeah, I think it's a terrible description of his views. I think it's probably a pretty accurate description of his views. This is just a couple of years ago. I don't think this ultimately is going to resonate with the national audience that we're looking at for these primaries, especially on Super Tuesday.
Does it cost him support in African-American communities?
I don't think it will. I don't think this is going to resonate in places like South Carolina and Nevada nearly as much as it resonates here in New York City. I think that there are so many more pressing issues right now, and I think that for a city mayor to have talked about something that was very local to New York City and to be running in a national race to become president, I think that a lot of voters are going to see these as quite distinct from each other. I think that there are clearly voters who are going to be put off by this, but in terms of the groups of voters that he's trying to gain support from, I think ultimately it's not going to dissuade them.
But here's the real $64,000 question. Since most people who vote in Democratic primaries tend to be more liberal, if there's a concern that a liberal like Bernie Sanders would profit from this, will more moderate Democrats find themselves going to the polls to prevent somebody so liberal from topping the ticket?
I mean, I think that there's no doubt that the sort of liberal wing of the Democratic Party would be less likely to vote for Mike Bloomberg after this comes out, but they were never going to be voting for Mike Bloomberg anyway. They were already committed to Bernie Sanders, and if not to Bernie Sanders, then to Elizabeth Warren. So I think that he's already running in the moderate lane, and so the sort of very liberal people, they weren't going to vote for him even before these comments came out. But
moderates don't tend to vote in primaries. Will this get more moderate voters, Heath, to come to the polls?
Yeah, I think this is an incredible experiment to see whether money actually affects turnout and whether advertisements at a level that we've really never seen before has the effect of turning out those that wouldn't typically turn out during the primary phase. I think we'll see on this question whether the past precedent of the far wings of each party turning out in early primaries actually holds this time. I think the vast money that the Bloomberg campaign is putting into states that really aren't even on the agenda right now is going to test whether those moderates are going to be motivated to come out that he's really been targeting with a lot of those campaign ads.
So let's move on to bail reform, criminal justice reform, and one aspect of it, discovery. We've now come to the point where the Manhattan District Attorney has found these requirements so onerous that he's considering either deferring or declining to prosecute certain cases. What does this mean, and does this put more pressure on Albany to do some changes?
Well, I think it should put some more pressure on Albany to do some changes. And in fact, we've seen that in the state Senate, the Democrats have now come up with a reform of the reform, as it were.
But the Assembly's not budging.
The Assembly isn't budging yet, but 2 months ago, the state Senate wasn't budging, and now the state Senate has budged. So let's see what happens with the Assembly as this pressure continues.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the process of sort of making the sausage that typically has the decision made after a lot of these negotiations happen. I think we're sort of flipped the situation here, and the negotiations that Mark described,
The
I think are
specter
likely
of a DA
to...
saying I can't bring cases because I can't produce the documents?
I don't know if that's true or not, but I think
It
that
is true.
I think that the effect on the negotiations ultimately is going to get some of the parts of this policy change enacted over time. I think that the negotiations that's going to happen, the deal that will ultimately struck, will bring in all of these groups that may seem like they're not ready to move now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether the Assembly is going to move by the time of the budget negotiations, which would be the logical time to do this, but there's clearly increasing pressure. There's clearly a lot of pressure on the state Senate side to do this. So we'll have to see how the negotiations play out. But I think that the fact that a district attorney is being forced into considering to decline prosecution of some cases, not because he doesn't have the evidence, not because he doesn't think they're good cases, but simply because discovery reform has become so onerous. And by the way, it really is enormously onerous. I think that's a real warning sign.
So moving on, after 2 separate attacks on NYPD officers in the 4-1 precinct, the Sergeants Benevolent Association blamed the mayor. They in a tweet, they said, Mayor de Blasio, the members of the NYPD are declaring war on you. Your interpretation of this? This
is an incredibly irresponsible and reckless tweet. We still, despite what's going on in Washington, live in a civil democracy. And in a civil democracy, the people to whom we give guns and entrust with the ability to make arrests don't get to declare war on the head of what is still the civil democracy. It was absolutely reckless.
What does war mean?
I have no idea, and this is why communication by Twitter, by tweet, is such a failing of our political system. We don't know what this means. We don't know exactly what this is in reference to.
Is it responsible?
It's irresponsible to provide only a portion of the information about a very, very significant and damning charge. And so to do this by Twitter, to do this by tweet, I think is really irresponsible. There may be an argument to be made, but Twitter is not the place to do it.
Mayor de Blasio actually responded to this. I'd like to have you hear what he said.
It's dangerous. It is dangerous for anybody in any position of authority to encourage hatred and division. He does not represent the men and women of the NYPD in terms of his views. He does not represent the leadership of the NYPD.
So do you think there should be some consequences, that the head of the Sergeants Benevolent Association should face some consequences for this tweet?
Yeah, I think that that's probably right.
What's the consequence?
I don't quite know, but certainly he owes an apology, not to the mayor, but to the citizens of the city that he has in fact sworn an oath to protect. He owes them an apology because, and I have to disagree with Heath a little bit here, I don't think the problem is Twitter. I think the problem is you don't get to make a statement like we're declaring war. It doesn't matter whether you make it in a lengthy interview, a lengthy article in which you state your reasons, or on Twitter. That's just not something you get to say.
I agree. No, I agree with that. I think that the choice of phrase is terrible. These are groups that can have legitimate critiques of what the mayor is doing, but to use that kind of rhetoric is terrible.
Gentlemen, thank you both for being on this show this week.